Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our finishing the race. We haven't quite finished the race. In fact, we have quite a ways to go. So we'll be talking about this for at least another week. So, my friends, let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence, that we have the strength and the courage and the clarity of mind to persevere, even when obstacles come in our path and contradictory thoughts drain the energy out of our aspirations. Help us to gather ourselves together with strength and honesty and to continue on the path, moving ever closer to your light. We are your children. We need your comforting presence and your wisdom so that we may come home to thee. Om. Peace. Amen. Excuse me just a moment. I grew up in an era when children just went out the door in the morning to play and, just came home at night. And when I was old enough to remember this, when I was quite young, before the age of 9, I lived in a smaller neighborhood and my best friend was next door and we just were always playing together. Then I moved to another part of the same city. This was El Paso, Texas. I've talked more about El Paso in the last few days than I have in decades, but in any case, for some reason my childhood is in front of me. But it was Hillcrest Drive, and it was a hill. Surprise, surprise. Hillcrest Drive went up like that. And it was just the block that we lived on, and it was one of those streets where there were like 20 kids on that street, and of various ages. There was an empty lot next door to the house that I lived in, and we would just go out and we would play. And we would play baseball softball in that lot next door, and all these different things. And it was literally just like in the movies, your mom would yell up the street. I think my mother actually had a particular bell that had a particular sound, and the 3 kids would hear the sound of that bell and we would know it was time to come home. Well, which I often do, I say, Divine Mother, we're your children. I just think about that. I thought about that all of a sudden. That's exactly what it is. We're out there playing and then we hear that bell ring. And we were allowed to go out every day and do whatever we wanted. My parents always knew fundamentally where we were, but not really. And we'd be in and out of other people's houses. But then that bell would ring, and all of a sudden you'd have this recollection that you belonged somewhere, and that this little interim was over and you had to go back. I mean, we've been talking from Swami's final exam, which is about death, the end of this incarnation. So in a very real sense, we've been thrown out to play for an entire incarnation, and then that bell rings and we have to come back. I recall reading about a person who had a near-death experience. He was on his deathbed, and he was very afraid of dying and had been very agitated. This was a true anecdote that was told in a book. And then he had an experience, and then he became completely relaxed and joyful. And the last week of his life, he had a totally different attitude toward the end of his life than he'd had before that. And he said he had, in the experience that he'd suddenly realized that this whole world that he'd been living in, of course, since he was born into that body, was like a movie set. And that just on the other side of it, there was this entirely other reality. And from that reality, you would just observe this as a movie set. And he said after he came out of that experience, he couldn't really see the other dimension anymore. But he said it was like just outside of his vision, like something that's just beyond your peripheral vision, and you sort of know it's there, and you keep catching a shadow of it, but when you turn around, you can't see it anymore. And he said that's how it was. He just could almost see it, but couldn't quite see it. But he had this absolute certainty that it was there. And then he became completely at ease about what was happening. It was exactly just moving from one room to another. When I finish my broadcast here and I get up and I walk to the kitchen or I go upstairs to my room, I don't think of it as any big transfer. I'm still under the same roof. I'm still operating in the same reality. When my mother died, I was in Europe as it happened. I left on a Sunday and she died on a Tuesday morning. My sister called me, and my mother had been quite ill, and she had Parkinson's. And one of the ways that Parkinson's ends is that it goes to the brain and it starts giving you seizures. And my mother had just started having seizures, and literally in the last 2 weeks she'd started having them. And I actually had a very serious conversation with all the gurus. I was in the emergency room with my mother, and she was just curled up in the bed, she'd become this tiny woman now. And she'd had a seizure, and I think it was the second one she'd had. And I called all the masters into the room, and I said to them basically, I've done a lot for you, and you have to do something for me. I'm calling in a favor at this point, which is we are not going to let my mother go through this. This is not an option. So, within 2 weeks, she died. And she died, it wasn't like she died suddenly because we knew she was unwell, but she did die suddenly. Her actual death came very quickly. She had another seizure. She went to the hospital, and the next morning she was gone, just like that. I was in Europe. My sister called, said, Mom died this morning. I was amazed by my response. I said, good for her. Meaning she just walked out of her body. Good for her. She saw it was over and she just left, which, but I really felt it was good for Master. That he really had taken mercy on her in that point. Now, the end of all of that is she just walked from one room to another. That's what I was trying to say. And so I was talking to Swami about it because I I needed his advice. I wasn't emotional about it. It was just my relationship with my parents by that point was quite impersonal. Um, but that's when he said to me, nothing happens when you die. Just like that. Nothing happens when you die. And he said it to me about 3 times. Nothing happens. And I've really held that a lot. Nothing happens in any way that really matters, which is all we're ever living with is our internal reality. I've been talking about that for days. I don't have to say it again here. That's all we ever have. And you don't escape from your internal reality just by dying. This is the extremely unfortunate fact why suicide is an unfortunate thing to do, because it doesn't work. Otherwise, I mean, it would be great, but it doesn't work. You do not escape from your inner consciousness. Now, I'm saying all that because I received an email yesterday from someone who really enjoys these broadcasts, and he made a very interesting comment, which is quite simple. Yesterday, I talked about alternate theories of happiness, and I was talking about the section of this essay in which Swamiji talks about um, every desire has to be fulfilled or overcome in some way. Again, if you didn't hear yesterday, you can listen to it. And I was trying to explain what that means because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it because of Master's answer to Swami's question. Even if as a child I wanted an ice cream cone, does even that desire have to be fulfilled? Swami expected Master to say, oh, don't be silly. But Swami said, without a hint of irony or humor, yes, even that, Master said. And then he talked about how they can all be swept away, not one by one, but by elevating the consciousness to realize what we really want. Now, an ice cream cone, of course, for some people, the relationship to food is a much more intense attachment than it is for others. But everybody has something that is an intense attachment. I remember, as it happened, I think I was sitting right in this chair, and I don't know where this samskar came from, but within sight of me, just a few steps away from where I'm sitting, there's a closet in the house I live in, and that closet is sort of deep and narrow, and it actually then goes under the staircase. So it's a very convoluted sort of closet, and there's a lot of space in there, and it's big enough for you to go in and shut the door and sort of be in there with the stuff. And this desire rose in me to fill that room with gold. Like, I remember the Donald Duck. Is it Donald Duck or Huey Duck or something? The cartoons as a child, and there was Scrooge, McScrooge, Duck McScrooge. I'm probably getting his name wrong, but he was a duck, but he was a huge miser, and he had big piles of gold, and he would dive in and out of his gold. It was just like, I think I'm remembering it correctly. It was just one of those strange cartoon images from childhood, and all of a sudden, I wanted to be like Duck McScrooge. I wanted to be able to go in there and touch and hold all this gold. Like, such a thing had never crossed my mind before, and I don't have that kind of relationship as a rule to money or valuable things. It's not a dominant karma for me in this lifetime. I will not be so presumptuous as to say it doesn't exist. I certainly have insecurities and fear around money at times. Not a great deal, but I have some. Anyway, all of that being said, it was the weirdest desire, but I could feel it. I could feel sort of what that would feel like. And I remember once I was in a circumstance where someone was really upsetting me. And I actually had the thought, not that I would have acted on it, but that I would like to shoot them. It just, if I had a gun, I could just shoot them. And again, I entered into a world where I realized, oh, that's what people do. You're causing me trouble, so I'll shoot you, and then I won't have these troubles anymore. Now, I have enough sense of cause and effect that I realized that shooting this person would not accomplish anything I hoped it would accomplish. But there's lots of things that are transparent to others that are not transparent to me. So now we come to what my friend wrote to me in the email, which is exceedingly real. Here we are, and Swami's very just, well, if you have a desire for a mate, then think of the superior joy of union with God. If you've ever cheated anyone, then just bless them. If you ever thought negatively, then just think supportively. Oh, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea, sir. Why didn't I think of that? Well, the reason I didn't think of it is because it's not within my reach. It's not who I am. I want to go in that closet and hold the gold. I want to shoot this person and get them out of my life. And it sounds good to just say, just let it go. But it is not so easy, which is, guess what? Welcome to karma. Welcome to reincarnation. So, first of all, in this essay, which you can access because it's available to you as a download right there where these are also broadcast, Swami is very specific. If you did this, then try this as an antidote. If you did that, try this as an antidote. Don't be guilty and ashamed. It's pointless. Just work with it like this. So he's exceedingly realistic, but he gives us the final solution. He gives us the final solution because he wants us to understand, one, that eventually we will be able to do it. And he wants us, he respects his reader enough to say, I'm going to give you the final solution. But he also expects us, and this is a huge part of it, and the word is humility. You have to have, and humility is self-honesty. So even on our deathbed, we don't want to make ourselves guilty because we can't actually give it all to God. That these alternate theories of happiness just still hold me. And the primary thing that makes it difficult for us to receive Divine Mother's love in us is not our sincere attachments and delusions, even though I know yesterday I was speaking of anything that is pulling us into duality. To that extent, we obviously can't go into the one. I mean, that's just metaphysics. It's not a big philosophical thought. It's just self-evident. If you're trying to become still and you're oscillating, then you can't become still. But if we're oscillating, well, there you are. We're oscillating. And in another context of another recording I was making, Swami just said the simple phrase, spiritual growth has to be relaxed and natural. It cannot be forced. And this is one of the most challenging parts of the spiritual path, is that Swamiji will tell us what the top of the mountain looks like. And we have to be humble. We have to have enough humility, which is enough self-honesty, to just be able to say, I know I'm going to get there. I know that the seed of perfect divine realization is within me. And absolutely, inevitably, I will get to the top of the mountain. But today I think I'm going to stop here and have a picnic. And we'll go on, and stopping here for a season, for an incarnation, for a few incarnations, it's really a little bit hard to gauge. So one of the fine arts of spiritual life, and one of the many things that I've been able to observe over the years, is the enormous challenge of not giving in to the temptation to lower the top of the mountain, to just sort of stand where I'm standing and call it spiritual success. And I've also observed, and we've thoroughly enjoyed, I mean, sometimes within the context of Ananda and with Swamiji. Swamiji always enjoyed the human comedy. And he was not judgmental, but that didn't mean that he was unwilling to perceive things as they were. This is way back in the 70s when everything was starting, and Yoga Journal was basically the medium of communication. There was no internet at that point. It was all print. And Yoga Journal was the mouthpiece for the, quote, New Age movement. Actually, there was something called New Age Journal at that time, too. So there were two of them. And one or the other of them, there was a full-page ad for a certain teacher, and he had his resume there. And his resume was who and what he'd done in this life. And then his resume, just sort of in the same way, included, the saint he'd been in the past life and the avatar that he was in the past life. And with all due respect, I think some of his perceptions were not accurate. He did not manifest in a way that was convincing, that made you feel that his resume was accurate. It became the source of a great deal of mirth, of wanting to rewrite Swami's resume so that it just looked a little more impressive. But my favorite of all was an enormously popular teacher at that time, whose literally his philosophy was, just keep on doing whatever you want to do, but just call it spiritual. And no surprise, he was really popular because people just got to do whatever. You have to work out the karma anyway. I mean, yeah, there's yes, and that's much more tempting, because then I don't have to really look at myself, and I don't have to truthfully and honestly say that I want God, but I also want a few other things. And so if even on our deathbed, we can do our best, or if in the course of this final exam, now you see we're studying for the final exam. But one of the things you do when you study is you find out where the gaps are in your understanding. You think you understand something, but then when you really get close to it, you realize that your knowledge is superficial. And that and for a person like myself, I can glibly, even, with great articulation, say all these things. But the ability to say them is quite different than in the absolute solitude of my heart, where it's just me and Divine Mother. Is this really who I am? If you think about little children. I remember watching this mother in this educational toy store, and she knew what she wanted her child to buy, but she turned her back on him, and he chose something else off the shelf. So now he's holding what he wants for no reason at all. He was 3 or 4 years old. He just happened to be the one he picked up. Here's the one she wants him to buy. So she's trying to coax him into wanting what she wants him to get, and she wants to get out of his hand the one he's holding. And she almost made it, but she got just a tiny bit impatient at the end. And just before he had really switched his loyalty, she tried to take this one away. And of course, then it became the most valuable thing in the world to him, and it all ended in screams and tears. Now, of course, I'm sure by the time the kid got home, it was all just fine. But that's sort of what we're working with all the time. Yes, of course, that's beautiful, and I do want it, but I'm going to just keep clutching my blankie over here, and I'll keep going for this until it turns out that you actually want to take my blanket away. No, actually, I'm not really going to let it go. I'm not ready to. I need it. And maybe someday I won't, but I do. And that's all the Divine Mother wants from us. She wants us. And see, this is why the word guilt comes up so much. And the word shame, which is also a word that was suggested to me, that's an important word too. Extremely important word. There's nothing at all to be ashamed of or to be guilty about. I know I'm going to be a college professor someday, but right now I'm 13. Right now I'm 6. And we can just quietly and honestly say that, and not to be embarrassed in front of God. I mean, I think about that seriously. And way back at the beginning, whenever I started this, I was talking about Dr. Ritchie, who had a death and return experience and was in the presence of Jesus. And they were looking at his life in a 360-degree panorama, and pretty much every incident was a profound embarrassment to Dr. Ritchie because he'd been a pretty mean-spirited little kid. He was only 21 at that point. And at a certain point, I'm repeating this, but he spread his arms so as to block Jesus's view of this life that was going on around, and making himself as big as possible. He pointed to like the one good incident in his whole upbringing. And he said as soon as he did that, he could feel that Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. He knew his whole thought process and his whole intention. And then he said in his Southern accent, the Savior was amused. The Savior was amused that he thought he could pretend to be something he wasn't. And at that point, Dr. Ritchie just completely let go. And of course, that was a return experience. But Divine Mother's on our side. We're judging ourselves. We're projecting judgment all around us. But the one person, the one consciousness that won't judge us at all is Divine Mother and Guru. They'll encourage us. They won't say, oh, you've reached the top of the mountain. But they'll say, oh, good job. You progressed 2 yards in this whole incarnation. We have a ways to go, but good for those 2 yards. Great work. And that's the truth of it. So even on our deathbed, if we really are there, and certainly while we're studying, we have to say, look at that. When I try to let this go, I don't really want to let this go at all. I really don't. And then you just say to Divine Mother, look at that. I guess this is who I am right now, so we're going to have to work on this, aren't we? But we're going to have to work on it in a way that's going to work for me. And that's, Mother has to keep showing us that there's something that we really want more. But we're not going to let go of that blankie till we're ready to let go of it. And who would understand that more than your mother? And why would she rip it out of your hands? I mean, yes, sometimes she does. I have to actually be honest about this. But only when she knows it's the right thing for you. In other words, we don't have to be afraid. Above all, we don't have to be afraid to just be who we are. That's spiritual development. As Swami said elsewhere, it has to be relaxed and natural. It can't be forced. That's the story of the seed growing into the apple tree. You can just yell at that sapling all you want, and you can hide it away so the relatives won't see it. I mean, you can do anything you want, but that sapling is not going to get to being an apple tree any faster for all the abuse that you heap on its head. And in fact, it'll get there a lot faster if you say, aren't you a darling little sapling? Just like enjoy your saplinghood until you get to be a bigger tree. So there we are with Divine Mother. I know, but don't change the teaching. Don't say, oh, this is right, this is it, this is really all I'm meant to be. No, no. We're meant to be absolutely free. I'm just not there yet. I have a little more to do, apparently. And then we surrender it. That's how you really surrender it. You don't surrender it by not wanting it anymore. You surrender it by not being concerned about it anymore. Concerned in the sense of, I know we're going to work this out. We're going to figure it out. I was asked, and I have repeated this, people have asked me, what does it mean to surrender things? And I had to really think about that. I've spent a lot of my life forcing things, and the relaxed and natural is very attractive to me because I've been on the opposite side of it a lot. And I've been humiliated by my limitations. I was saying to someone, humility is the goal, but sometimes it starts with humiliation, and it's either public humiliation, and in the marvelous Ananda family, it's global because everybody knows you, or it's humiliation inside yourself. Just the humiliation of realizing that I thought I was some big spiritual whiz kid. Turns out I'm not. And it's embarrassing. Even if you're the only one in there, it's embarrassing. But it's just the truth. And nobody's surprised, when a 6-year-old pretends to be a grown-up, puts on mommy's high heels and picks up daddy's briefcase, says they're going off to work. We just think it's absolutely charming that they imagine themselves to be grown-up, and how they try to persuade us that they're grown up. They put their little feet in mommy's giant shoes, pick up a briefcase that's twice as big as them, and go off to do work and think that they look like grown-ups. Then it becomes humility. Then it becomes, isn't this adorable? And yes, Divine Mother, I know that eventually you will be enough for me, but right now I need some other experiences, or I seem to need some other experiences. And surrender is, what are we going to do about this? That's the phrase that's finally come to me. Divine Mother, what are we going to do about this? Meaning, I want her to be part of the story. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to pretend. I remember this period of time when Swamiji he'd given me the assignment of taking care of what was then called Ananda Publications. And I was just terrible at it. I had absolutely no instinct for business, zero, none. And I had 1,000 other psychological quirks that just made the whole thing a nightmare. And he kept trying to help me, and I had so many psychological quirks, I couldn't even accept his help. It was just a mess, but I kept shining on, acting as if like I really had this together. And it was just obvious to everybody but me, that I was so far over my head. And at one point, finally, it just reached crisis proportions, and Swami, took me aside because it was a mess. And I was beginning to really resent the pressure of it. Everything was bad. And he said, you wanted to, the phrase he used was, you wanted to be a good disciple, he said, but I could feel the resentment building in you. And he said, I love these words, you never fooled me. And I said, oh my gosh, what a colossal waste of time and energy. And that's really stayed with me. You never fooled me. So just relax. Just relax. Do your best. Recognize what the end of the road looks like, but just relax, because you never fooled. You never fooled your superconscious self, and you never fooled Divine Mother. And the Savior is amused. Just when we watch those little kids trying to be something that they're not, Mommy and Daddy are so amused. They have to take you so seriously. I'm running away from home today. Oh, you are, darling. Where are you going? I'm going to go across the street. Oh, good. Do you want a sandwich? You just treat them as if they were serious, but inside you're just amused. That's how we are to Divine Mother. And it actually makes the relationship all the sweeter because of that. If we will allow it, when it says as many as received him, this is what it is to receive God, is to be completely without self-concern. We think self-realization is to perfect this little ego self. It's not. It's to absolutely lose interest in this ego self. just completely lose interest in it and just let it run its story because we're so busy just enjoying the company of our loving Divine Mother that nothing else matters to us anymore. Is it easy? No. Is it the only game in town and the only one worth playing? Absolutely. So let's just hang together as friends and do our best. And God and Guru will take us there. God bless you.